You're watching SABC News. Let's cross now live to Nairobi, where opposition leader Raila Odinga is addressing his supporters in response to yesterday's KENYATTA presidential win. We're live to Nairobi now.
Exercise. We reiterate that this election must not stand. If allowed to stand, it will make a complete mockery of elections and might well be the end of the ballot as a means of instituting a government in Kenya. It will completely destroy the public confidence in the vote. Reasonable people will not turn out to vote in elections with predetermined outcomes. Elections will become coronation rituals for an imperial presidency. The sham election will render useless the historic Supreme Court ruling that annulled the August 8th presidential election. On the eve of the election, we saw the ominous signs of UHURU's threat to fix the problem in the Supreme Court, when the court failed to raise a quorum to hear a case challenging the legality of the election on account of willful abstention of some and intimidation of other judges, including the shooting of the Deputy Chief Justice's security detail the previous evening. On August 8th, the election was already used to muster a fraudulent parliamentary majority. Both Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto have stated publicly that they intend to use this majority to make constitutional changes. Parliament is on its way to becoming a rubber stamp of the executive, as it was in the KANU's one-party state. The regressive amendment to the election law has now come to force, effectively emasculating the IEBC and the Supreme Court. If sham elections are allowed to stand, what will stop the regime from conducting sham referenda to remove the constitutional provisions that they do not like? Like, for example, term limit? Nothing. They will have achieved every despot's dream, which, in the famous words of Lord Hewart of Barry, is, and I quote, to subordinate Parliament, to evade the courts, and to render the will or the caprice of the executive unfettered and supreme, unquote. The sham election portends a president who is in office unconstitutionally. You have a constitution with ambiguous provisions on the standards that elections must fulfill. The same constitution states that power can only be exercised by democratically elected leaders. A president who is elected in an election that does not comply with the constitution cannot legitimately be constitutionally exercise authority on behalf of the people. If election is allowed to stand, the highest office in the land will be occupied by a person who has usurped power. We in NASA are resolute that this sham election cannot and will not be allowed to stand. We will not allow two megalomaniacs to destroy the dream of freedom and democracy that generations have sacrificed and worked so hard for. We shall see to it that we conduct a free, fair, and credible presidential election as ordered by the Supreme Court. NASA's position on dialogue, on national dialogue. A national dialogue is being called for many quarters. NASA is for dialogue. All political differences are resolved through dialogue. NASA has actively pursued dialogue with the IEBC on the reforms required to hold a free, fair and credible elections. The engagement was in vain. He put forward the irreducible minimum reforms for free and fair elections. No one challenged them. The bone of contention was that they could not be done within 60-day window for the fresh elections. We leave it to those who argue that bora uchaguzi, that any election will do, sio uchaguzi bora, to mull over what good the farcical elections has done. Before engaging in any dialogue, we must also be clear what differences we are sitting down to resolve. Suggestions have been made that what is needed is a compromise between Jubilee and NASA. There are even those who see the crisis as nothing more than a personal fight between UHURU KENYATTA and Raila Odinga, or the KENYATTAs and Odingas, that could be resolved by a private arrangement. This view is mistaken. The political crisis we are in is about free and fair elections, specifically and fundamentally about democracy, constitutionalism, and the rule of law. The Supreme Court ordered a repeat election held in compliance with the Constitution and the law. The order has not been complied with. It must be. It is in our best interest that we do so sooner rather than later. Our program of action, National Resistance Campaign. As we announced last week, NASA has two organs: the Coalition's Parliamentary Party, PP, and the National Resistance Movement. The resistance movement shall be responsible for implementing a vigorous, positive political action program that includes economic boycotts, peaceful processions, picketing, and other legitimate forms of protest. If there is no justice for the people, let there be no peace for the government. The People's Assembly. Governments are not above constitutions, and constitutions are not above the people. The people retain ownership of the sovereign power. This is the reason why all the progressive constitutions, the people reserve the right to exercise their sovereignty directly. That is contained in Article 1 of our Constitution. The fate of all governments that usurp and abuse power is to fall. We have obligated ourselves to respect, obey, and defend our Constitution. We are now compelled by this obligation to chart our way back to democracy, constitutionalism, and the rule of law. We announce today the establishment of a People's Assembly. The People's Assembly is the vehicle through which we will exercise the solemn duty of restoring democracy, constitutionalism, and the rule of law. The People's Assembly will be a broad-based forum consisting of elected leaders and the leadership of other sectors of society, in particular workers, civil society, religious leaders, women, youth, and economic interest groups. We will be announcing the date and program of the Assembly's inaugural convention in the coming days. The People's Assembly will continue to exist until a legitimate presidency is restored. As part of the People's Assembly, NASA is forming a task force to look into the systemic governance weaknesses that have precipitated the unfolding political crises, including but not limited to: 1. The systemic continuing failure of electoral bodies and the electoral system in general. 2. Performance of national security organs and the abuse thereof by the executive. 3. The political architecture and the structure of the executive and parliament in particular. 4. Protection and safeguarding of devolution. 5. Exclusion and discrimination in the allocation or distribution of public resources. 6. The continued inability of the state and our society in general to deal with the root causes of political strife, in particular poverty, unemployment, extreme inequality, economic marginalization, corruption, and historical grievances. We anticipate that the task force recommendations will include constitutional amendments. They will be presented to the People's Assembly for adoption and thereafter to the county assemblies for ratification. We call upon all county assemblies to pass resolutions supporting the establishment of the People's Assembly. Defense of the right to peaceful protest. Peaceful protest is an inalienable political right. As an inalienable political right, is one of the most important freedoms that we have secured for ourselves in our 2010 Constitution. Every person has a right peaceably and unwarned to assemble, to demonstrate, to picket, and to present petitions to public authorities. That is Article 37. Since the announcement of the August 8th election, the Jubilee government has sought to criminalize dissent. Over 60 innocent Kenyans, including children, have died needless deaths, and many more maimed at the hands of would-be despots seeking to impose their will on the people. A system of government where dissent is criminalized as a name. It is called a totalitarian state. We are often reminded that external vigilance is the price we must pay for liberty. So we will guard our right to dissent by exercising it. We will continue to assemble, demonstrate, to picket, and to present petition to public authorities as often as we choose. God bless Kenya. Thank you. No questions.
Do you have any questions?
You're watching SABC News. It's nearly 3:30. Now, this is a live crossing to Nairobi in Kenya, where you've just heard opposition leader Raila Odinga wrap up his first address since yesterday's announcement of a Kenyatta win in the polls. Now, Odinga slums the electoral result yesterday as a sham, saying the president won an election that does not comply with the constitution. NASA is resolute that this poll result will not be allowed to stand. On national dialogue, Odinga says NASA remains willing to talk, but there must be clarity on the agenda. He has called on his supporters to protest peacefully, well within the bounds of the law. Now, NASA's program of action is a national resistance campaign that will include economic boycotts and legitimate picketing and petitioning. Odinga is saying here that if there is no justice for the people, then there will be no peace for the government. NASA is to form a people's assembly until he feels a legitimate presidency is restored.